Aloha, I'm Kirsten Faulkner, Executive Director of Historic Hawaii Foundation. Mahalo for the opportunity to provide an overview about common questions about buying, selling, and owning a historic home in Hawaii. Historic Hawaii Foundation is a membership-based, statewide nonprofit organization. It was founded in 1974 and works to help people save historic places. We work through educational programs like this one, as well as advocacy, technical assistance, and building public awareness and capacity for protecting and preserving historic places. Hawaii has a rich, storied, and complicated history, which is shown in its architecture and development patterns. The architecture of Hawaii reflects its unique history. Owning a significant historic home and listing it on the Hawaii Register of Historic Places contributes to the preservation of that history by providing a tangible connection to past eras for the benefit of both present and future generations. Owning a property that is listed on the Historic Register and abiding by programs to ensure preservation of its special character and sense of place helps promote understanding, inspiration, and education for both the owner and members of the community. In Hawaii, daily life coexists with reminders of a long history that began an estimated 2,000 years ago, with the earliest recording Polynesian voyagers landed in the islands. The centuries following their arrival unfolded as a rich and complex narrative that included the Hawaiian Kingdom, the missionary and plantation eras, World War II, statehood, the tourism and development boom of the 1970s, all the way up to the present. So first I wanted to talk about some terms and definitions. We usually get a basic question of, well, what is a historic property? Under state law, a historic property is any building, structure, object, district, or site that is over 50 years old. But that definition is very broad and doesn't capture the other qualities that are important as age and building on that importance. So the state's administrative rules narrow it down by adding a definition of significant to historic property. Significance means that it meets the criteria for listing on the Hawaii Register of Historic Places. This is often referred to as eligibility. Please note that it doesn't limit it to those sites that are actually listed on the Historic Register, but it also includes those that meet the criteria and would be listed if they were nominated. So starting with different types of properties, there's different types of places that include sites, structures, buildings, objects, and districts. They include the settings, the landscapes, the small scale features that are associated with the properties. So it's not just buildings, it's not just houses, but all the other kinds of fabric and context to provide meaning and diversity to Hawaii's history. The Hawaii Register of Historic Places is a state-run program that's established by statute. The Hawaii Historic Places Review Board is empowered to consider nominations, hold public hearings, make findings on how a specific property meets the criteria, and eventually will enter those properties onto the state register. The agency that is responsible for supporting the review board and keeping the register is the State Historic Preservation Division of the Department of Land and Natural Resources. This is often abbreviated to SHPD or SHPD, and this division is also responsible for project reviews, tax credit certifications, and overall implementation of the state's historic preservation program. Historic Hawaii Foundation is not SHPD. My organization, Historic Hawaii Foundation, is a nonprofit, and we work directly with the public, and of course we partner with our public agencies and cohorts at SHPD, but we are not actually responsible for either managing the review process or this nomination process. However, we're very excited to be able to share this information, but the official Register of Historic Places is kept by the state. There is also a parallel National Register of Historic Places. Both the state and the national registers use the same nomination forms, the same technical guidelines, the same criteria, the same information when they consider whether or not to list a property. This help ensures consistency and compatibility, but then the process is different. Many property owners who are successful at having a historic listing on the state register will also then nominate the property for further consideration for listing on the national register. So what are those criteria? What does it mean to be eligible for listing on the state or national register? Basically, there's three tests. One is whether or not the property meets one or more of the criteria to be significant. Does it retain historic integrity? And then, of course, is the property old enough to be considered historic? We've already talked about the age criteria of 50 years for the state register. The National Register doesn't actually have an age breakoff. It's generally considered 50, but properties that are younger than that might be eligible if they meet other special considerations. But the properties of significance include being associated with historic events, people important in history, design or construction achievements, or the potential to provide information about the past. Significance can include individual events, for example, the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, but it can also include broad patterns of history. For example, the sugar and pineapple plantation eras that transformed agriculture, construction, society, and culture in Hawaii. The properties of integrity mean those aspects of the property itself that then convey that significance. Basically, is there enough left of the property to show why it was significant in the first place? So those aspects include things like location, design, workmanship, setting, feeling, association. Something really important could have happened there, but if it's just a parking lot now, it might be significant, but it wouldn't have integrity. So this is a huge topic. What is eligible? What are those criteria? How do you know? We have other training modules and materials about it, but we don't really have time to go into details in today's session because I wanted to move on to historic homes specifically. Historic Hawaii Foundation receives numerous inquiries about historic properties from the public and from realtors about buying, selling, and owning a historic home. Frequently asked questions range from, can I make changes? How do I nominate it? Can I do things like add solar panels or remodel the kitchen? What is the process? And the number and frequencies of these questions really suggested a need for an easy to digest brochure, specifically for the real estate market, for realtors and for their clients. So last year in 2021, Historic Hawaii Foundation reached out to some of our members who are well-known realtors in the Honolulu market. So Sharon Au, Liz Bills, Gavin Hall, Dawn Marie, and Doug Shanefield really came together to help us think through on this topic. What do people need to know and how can we help convey that information quickly and accurately? We asked for their input on a suite of information resources that will encourage current homeowners and prospective homeowners to either keep or add a historic home to the state or National Register of Historic Places. So the URL for this landing page is historichawaii.org/yourhistorichome. You can find all kinds of information there, as well as a downloadable PDF of the brochure. So before making a commitment to owning a historic property, it's really important for everyone to understand both the benefits and the responsibilities and to enter into that relationship with the historic property mindfully and deliberately and with commitment. I'm going to start with the benefits because that's the fun part. But the benefits include, of course, public appreciation. When we think about Hawaii and how special and unique it is, the historic properties and our neighborhoods and these districts really convey that to both the owners and to the general public, being able to experience that piece of Hawaii's history. And then there's also incentive programs. All of the counties in Hawaii offer a property tax exemption for historic residences. So this is available to reduce the annual property bill in exchange for retaining the important characteristics and maintaining the historic home. Other benefits include federal income tax benefits, although this is only for income producing properties. So rental homes as well as commercial and industrial properties. So it's not available to homeowner occupied residences, but it is available for other kinds of historic properties. And then, of course, it fosters neighborhood pride. It preserves craftsmanship. It has amazing environmental benefits through sustaining existing embodied energy materials, and taking care of what we already have is inherently more sustainable than building new. And of course, it enhances Hawaii's beauty and character and protects places that matter. There's also responsibilities that come with owning a historic home. And the main thing to think about here is how to maintain, preserve, and care for those characteristics that convey that historic significance in the first place. So there are lots of guidance documents, different programs, different technical assistance programs that help do that. What this means, though, is change is possible, adaptation is possible, modification is possible, but it has to be done in a sensitive and appropriate way. It can't be done haphazardly. Of course, you wouldn't want anyone to completely demolish or change the setting, but things like updating wiring and plumbing and sustainability and making sure that the home is usable and livable are all allowed. Accessibility for aging in place or for adapting for different kinds of users, all can happen. It just has to be done to specific standards and guidelines that support those improvements in a way that is compatible and harmonious. And to do that, there are these health, safety, land use codes all have sections that address existing buildings. So when making those alterations or modifications, they need to follow those historic preservation standards, but they are allowed. I get frustrated when people talk about, well, you can't do anything. Well, that's just not true. You can. You just have to do it well and deliberately. And to make sure that that happens, there's a built-in process in the permit review. So basically, when a property owner goes in for building, zoning, accessibility, or land use permits, those applications get routed to the State Historic Preservation Division to ensure that compliance with those preservation standards occurs. So those national preservation standards and guidelines are really useful. We have, again, other training modules about them and what they mean, but a lot of them are just common sense. Are you taking care of it in a way that really honors that history? Other responsibilities look at things like adding solar panels or energy efficiency. Again, it can happen. A question we get often is whether or not a historic property, especially a home, has to be open to the public. It does not. However, that tax exemption for property taxes does have conditions that come along with it. And one of those conditions is that the home be visible from the public street. So not that people can go onto the private property or into the home, but it has to be visible from the public way. A lot of homes are on private roads or have large vegetation. They may not be visible from the public way. So there's an alternative visual access that basically says on the second Saturday of every month, members of the public can go to a viewing point and view the property, and that would be a condition of the tax exemption. But other than that, need to have an unobstructed view and retaining the exterior of the property. There are no obligations to have it open to the public. We also get questions about value, property value. Individual designation doesn't tend to affect a property value either higher or lower than everything around it. But historic districts and neighborhoods that have a high percentage of historic designations tend to have higher values. And you can see that in places like Manoa and Nu'uanu, where the quality of life and the higher aesthetic and the mature landscaping and that sense of history actually add to the property values overall. But there are also many examples of affordable homes that are also historic, thinking about Eva Villages, for example, where the historic designation was actually a means of keeping them affordable for the residents. So it can go both ways. That is basically what the brochure and the website goes over, with lots of links going to more resources. So some of those resources include that brochure, Buying and Selling a Historic Home in Hawaii, and that's at historichawaii.org. There's a how-to guide for nominating a resident to be on the Hawaii Register of Historic Places, how to do that. Information about these tax credit programs, both federal and local. The standards and guidelines for the treatment of historic properties, sustainability overall and solar panels specifically, and then of course the State Historic Preservation Division. So I just wanted to add with or end with thanks to historic property owners. They do an amazing job of protecting these neighborhoods and these amazing places and caring for them. One of the property owners of the Burbank Track in Nuuanu really shared with us that living in a historic home is a privilege. It's a chance to live in a treasure that past generations loved and cherished. And the art within the architecture speaks volumes, embodying values of thoughtfulness, restraint, consideration, and tradition. So we will leave you with that. And again, thank you for the opportunity. We're pleased to be able to share this information, and mahalo to all of you.